Welcome to our deep dive into the complex and turbulent history of one of the most notorious gang rivalries in America, the Crips and the Bloods. Their feud spans decades and has marked the streets of Los Angeles with a legacy of violence and tragedy. But how did this start? How did these groups evolve and grow to take over the city's neighborhoods? Let's unravel this grim chapter of American history. Formation and early days of the Crips. Our journey into this notorious rivalry starts in the tumultuous era of the late 1960s. Amid the social and racial unrest that was sweeping across America, a new force was taking shape on the streets of South Los Angeles, the Crips. The origin of the Crips is traced back to an alliance formed between local neighborhood gangs led by two charismatic figures, Raymond Washington and Stanley Tookie Williams. Their motivation for establishing this alliance wasn't driven by power lust or territorial control, as is often the case with gang formations. Instead, their primary goal was protection. They sought to defend their neighborhoods from the incursion of rival gangs, which were growing increasingly violent and rampant. A distinguishing characteristic of the Crips, a feature that would become emblematic of their identity, was the blue bandanas donned by their members. This visual symbol served dual purposes. On one hand, it was a clear marker of territory, letting others know that they were entering Crips-controlled neighborhoods. On the other hand, it was a sign of allegiance, a signal to both fellow members and rivals alike about where their loyalty lay. Despite the protective intent behind its formation, the Crips soon became a force to be reckoned with. They quickly distinguished themselves through their organization, street smarts, and when necessary, their willingness to resort to violence. As their reputation grew, so did their ranks, drawing in more and more young men from the neighborhood, eager to find a sense of belonging and safety in a world that seemed increasingly hostile. Thus, in the streets of South Los Angeles, against a backdrop of social upheaval and racial tension, the Crips were born. A protective alliance that would, in time, evolve into one of the most infamous and feared gangs in American history. Their rise marked the beginning of a new chapter in the city's troubled saga of gang warfare, a chapter that would soon introduce a rival faction, setting the stage for a decades-long conflict. Rise of the Bloods. As the Crips continued to expand their footprint, their burgeoning influence started to instill fear and resentment among other neighborhood gangs. They saw the power shift in the gang landscape, feeling their dominance threatened and their security undermined by the ever-growing presence of the Crips. With their survival at stake, these smaller, disparate gangs realized they needed to form an alliance to protect their interests and push back against the Crips' dominance. Out of this sense of necessity, a collective of these threatened gangs united under a new banner, the Bloods. This coalition was initially formed as a defensive measure, similar to the original intent of the Crips. However, their shared animosity towards the Crips fueled a bond among them, and they soon began to see themselves as a singular entity, a brotherhood standing up against a common enemy. To distinguish themselves from their rivals, they adopted red bandanas. This vibrant color, contrasting sharply against the Crips' blue, created a stark visual division that mirrored their deep-seated rivalry. As the red of the Bloods spread through the streets of Los Angeles, it marked not just the birth of a new gang, but the beginning of a fierce and bloody rivalry that would resonate through the city for decades to come. The rivalry intensifies. The rivalry between the Crips and the Bloods escalated in a way few could have anticipated. With the passage of time, the intensity of their feud grew exponentially, fueled by the incendiary mix of territorial disputes, personal vendettas, power dynamics, and a fight for control over lucrative criminal activities. This growing animosity started to blur the original intentions behind the formation of these gangs, transforming them from protective groups into forces of chaos. The streets of Los Angeles became a veritable war zone, with both gangs carving out territories within the city. The division of these territories was more than just a map of control, it was a delineation of identity. Wearing the wrong color in the wrong neighborhood could mean a death sentence, highlighting the high stakes of this territorial divide. The colors of blue and red painted the city into a dangerous chessboard, with every move potentially leading to violent encounters. Each act of violence would invariably lead to retribution, a spiraling cycle of vengeance that seemingly had no end. This cyclical pattern of violence and retaliation started to embed itself deeply within the identities of both the Crips and the Bloods. Each new generation was brought up in an environment saturated with hatred and suspicion towards the other, perpetuating the rivalry further. With each passing year, the feud deepened, turning into a grim tradition handed down from generation to generation. The animosity seeped into the cultural fabric of the gang members' lives, dictating their actions, attitudes, and even their sense of self. The feud was no longer just about control or defense, it had become a part of their identity, a badge they wore with a mix of pride and defiance. How the Crips and Bloods took over. Both the Crips and the Bloods expanded their influence by utilizing fear and violence as tools of control. Their neighborhoods became battlegrounds, with violent conflicts often erupting between rival gangs. This created a cycle of retaliation and a climate of fear, making it difficult for residents to escape the grip of gang violence. Additionally, the Crips and Bloods formed intricate alliances with other gangs, allowing them to expand their reach and influence beyond their initial territories. These alliances enabled them to establish a network of criminal activities, including drug trafficking, robbery, and extortion. The lure of financial gain and the power derived from controlling illicit markets further fueled their growth and influence. As the Crips and Bloods expanded their control over Los Angeles, their territories became known as blue and red zones, respectively. Neighborhoods were divided along gang lines, creating a checkerboard-like pattern across the city. This territorial division created a sense of identity and pride within each gang, as members sought to protect and defend their territories from rival gangs. The influence of the Crips and Bloods eventually spread beyond Los Angeles, reaching other cities and states. This expansion was driven by several factors, including migration patterns, the prison system, and the spread of gang culture through music and media. Today, both gangs have a presence in various parts of the United States and even internationally. The social impact. The rivalry between the Crips and Bloods has left a lasting and devastating impact on the social fabric of the communities affected by their violence. The neighborhoods caught in the crossfire became war zones, with innocent residents living in constant fear for their safety and well-being. The presence of these gangs created an atmosphere of tension and mistrust, making it difficult for residents to go about their daily lives without the looming threat of violence. One of the most significant social impacts of the Crips and Bloods rivalry is the perpetuation of a cycle of poverty, crime, and systemic oppression. The prevalence of gang activities in these neighborhoods often leads to a decline in economic opportunities and investment. Businesses are reluctant to establish themselves in areas known for gang violence, resulting in limited job prospects and a lack of resources. This cycle of poverty contributes to the sense of hopelessness and despair experienced by many residents, making it challenging to break free from the grips of gang influence. Moreover, the violence and criminal activities associated with the Crips and Bloods have had profound consequences for the younger generations growing up in these neighborhoods. Many children are exposed to violence from an early age and are at risk of being recruited into gang life. The lack of positive role models and the allure of belonging and protection offered by gangs can make it difficult for young individuals to resist the pull of gang involvement. The impact of gang violence extends beyond physical harm and economic struggles. It also erodes the social fabric of these communities. Fear and distrust become prevalent, leading to social isolation and a breakdown in community cohesion. Residents may become reluctant to engage with one another, resulting in the loss of support networks and a sense of unity. The constant threat of violence and the need for self-preservation can lead to a breakdown in interpersonal relationships and community bonds. Addressing the social impact of the Crips and Bloods rivalry requires a multifaceted approach. It involves not only addressing the immediate violence, but also tackling the root causes that perpetuate gang activities such as poverty, lack of educational opportunities, and systemic inequality. Initiatives that focus on community development, youth empowerment, and providing alternative pathways to success can help break the cycle of violence and create a more positive future for these communities. Furthermore, collaboration between law enforcement, community organizations, and residents is crucial to combating gang violence and rebuilding communities affected by it. Investing in social programs offering counseling and support services and providing resources for economic development can help create a safer and more prosperous environment for residents to thrive. The rivalry between the Crips and Bloods is more than a feud between two gangs. It's a complex tale of power, territorial disputes, and survival. Their story, while steeped in violence, is also a mirror to the socioeconomic and racial disparities that fueled their rise and continue to exist today. As we continue to grapple with these issues, the legacy of the Crips and Bloods serves as a grim reminder of the consequences of neglect and marginalization.